like and subscribe. What is the worst thing your government has done that most people don't know about? A charity built a children's hospital in my third world home country. The moment they left, the government sold the incubators, beds, air conditioning and anything else that can be removed. Distributed the money amongst themselves. Current war on drugs here in the Philippines. President Duterte allowed the police to kill suspected drug dealers. That's right, kill, not arrest, no investigation, no warrant, no court. A cop can waltz inside a house of a guy he doesn't like, kill him, plant some drugs and a gun, and go off scot-free. This has cost the lives of 5,000 drug dealers with no progress on the drug war. Sweden had concentration camps during WW2 where they conducted racial studies. Everything my country has done has been so blatant and in your face. I am sure the hidden things are even more shocking. Let us just say we did not know about 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate being stored in the port for 9 years. Operation Searchlight. Basically, Bangladesh and Pakistan were once the same country. Don't ask me how that works, the bloody logistics don't make sense. Right, so there was a pretty terrible typhoon in Bangladesh that required urgent medical and financial assistance. Bangladesh, known as East Pakistan at the time, accepted aid from India while Pakistan, who really hates India, was slow to respond. Honestly, there's lots of reasons as to why Bangladesh split from Pakistan after the 1971 war. One big one being right after the typhoon, Pakistan decided to hold elections. Bangladesh got rightfully ed off and put all of their votes into one party. Since Bangladesh had a much bigger population at the time, that party won handily. It looked like Bangladesh would finally get some aid. The military responded by commencing Operation Searchlight. They imprisoned intellectuals, slaughtered thousands of Bangladeshi officers, students and basically anyone with a way of assisting the Bangladesh party. They also obliterated any institution that could support refugees, and raped thousands more. India got a little fed up with Pakistani soldiers constantly going over their airspace to do this, so they joined in the fighting. Alongside Bangladesh, India brutally beat the out of Pakistan, like giving a bully of his own medicine. India also had backup in the form of the USSR, and our allies were disgusted by our actions, plus America wanted India as an ally instead of Palestine. Eventually we surrendered, but we totally screwed Bangladesh for generations to come. Can you believe it was once the backbone of our economy? Nowadays, no one's sorry cause the military made sure to only have the briefest of mentions of it in our history books. Like you have reasons for the war, but no details of any particular massacres. Plus our intentional aid of the Taliban in the 90s tends to totally overshadow this event. Denmark. In 1951 the state forcibly removed 22 Greenlandic children from their parents, and moved them to Denmark, in order to give them a better life, so there could be role models for other Greenlanders, as a social experiment, which for obvious reasons was deeply traumatizing for the children. Only 22. Those are rookie numbers, compared to big friendly Canada. The Canadian government and Catholic Church are responsible for thousands of native children being beaten, raped and buried in mass graves at our residential schools. Recently it's been very big news here, because we're finding even more mass graves. Think 700 bodies per location, multiple new locations being found in the last month or so. We've known how bad residential schools were, but the sheer scope of the problem is now general public knowledge. A couple churches have been vandalized and arsoned since these new findings, and all white people can do is get mad that our prime minister isn't coming out and calling church burning in response to a genocide or hate crime, which I don't think it is. Arson is bad, but burning a church because they destroyed your culture and killed your children is different than burning a church because you don't like Jesus. The latest documented forced sterilization of Native Americans happened in 75/76. Netherlands, massacring close to the entire population of an island group in Indonesia, because we wanted all the nutmeg for ourselves. It happened in the 17th century on the Banda Islands. The first time the military ever dropped bombs from airplanes, they were dropped on American citizens, here in the US offer. Years before Pearl Harbor. On workers on strike. Not sure how well this is known, but there was an uprising in Namibia in the 18th century, while it was still a German colony. The German soldiers refused to fight, because they didn't want to shoot civilians. So the High Command told them to shoot over their heads, to push them out into the desert where they would starve them out. In the end, I believe 200k died. I don't want to kill people quickly. That's okay, you can kill them slowly. Sweet. Granted Japanese researchers immunity from being prosecuted for war crimes after WW2 in order to access the medical data. https://n wikipedia.org/wiki/unit_731. The researchers obtained through ghoulish medical experiments they conducted on living human subjects. A British lawyer, during his lunch break, was tasked with drawing the new borderline for Pakistan and India. He drew it with absolutely no knowledge or care or understanding of religious implications, and uprooted over 10 million people of varying religions, and forced them to move, causing tensions that escalated into violence. Radcliffe, the lawyer, and his team had no experience in borders, no advisors on how to draw a border, deliberately didn't get the UN experts involved as it would save time, and save face, and not give the impression that the British, edit, were losing control of their empire. Now we have, still to this day, a war between Pakistan and India. Radcliffe burnt all his papers before leaving, and admitted that his lack of adaptation for the Indian climate affected his decision-making time as he just wanted to leave. So basically, he drew a border through a swathe of religions, understanding and not caring about the religious implications, and uprooting people's lives, because this place, it's too hot, I'm going home. Yeah, that'll do, let's go. The history of world problems that have their roots in a bread with a map and a pencil is pretty extensive. The massacre of Aboriginal people, also referred to as the Killing Times. Not sure how unknown this was, but it was never mentioned in school, so I'll put it here. Hard to pick just one. But off the top of my head, the Tuskegee experiment. Erasing people that are against the government politics happens every time in Mexico. During WW2, Croatia had special concentration camps for killing children. Buying cocaine from Colombia and selling to Americans. Creating the American addiction to crack and cocaine. Then starting the war in drugs which they introduced. Cherry on top, sending millions of Americans mostly black to jail, and breaking families on the product they introduced. They machine gunned their people, and then run tanks on the dead bodies, to make it to a pulp. Easier to clean the street with water hose. Indian residential schools. In Canada, starting in the mid-1800s, it became law that all indigenous children had to attend boarding schools funded by the government. If the families refused, the children were forcibly removed by a special police force. The children were stripped of their culture, and forbidden to speak their indigenous language, to better assimilate them to the Euro-majority population. Many of the schools were in remote locations, to try to prevent families from intervening in the indoctrination of their children by the Catholic and Protestant churches at Canada's behest. The schools were overcrowded, underfunded, and had a mortality rate of 40–60%. Sexual and physical abuse was rampant. A good chunk of Canadians were unaware to various extents of schools, but over 150,000 children attended the schools over more than 100 years. The last one closed in 1996, so this history and trauma are much more recent than people are aware of. There has been shockwaves the past month up here, as searches on just a handful of properties that house the schools found almost 2,000 unmarked graves. The thing that S me up the most about residential schools is that, because they ran for generations and there was typically one per First Nations group, often multiple generations of a family could end up abused and tortured by the exact same individuals. Like, imagine, if you as a small child had been kidnapped and tortured, and probably raped by some psychopath. But when you're an adult, you don't get to move on, and try to make a better life for your own kids than you had *yo you have to send them back, to be raised by the exact same person who did it to you. What the would you do in that scenario? Either you drink yourself to death or you deliberately never get attached to your own kids, just to survive the pain. Multiple generations of families were afraid to love their own children. It wasn't until someone pointed that out, that I fully grasped the true multi-generational horror of them. Trail of Tears comes to be the worst act in my head currently, though there are probably more worse acts that they have done. This comment has been censored by the Chinese Communist Party. China is the best country that has ever existed, and will ever exist. Switzerland sold a ton of guns to the Nazis. If most people means less than 50%. While the US would, overall, accept some 132,000 European Jews from 1933 to 1945, they also turned many away, including effectively halting emigration of European Jews between 1940 to 41. Roughly 60% of Americans surveyed, between 1938 to 1940 in 5 different polls, found Jews to have objectionable qualities. State Dept officials tried to block a report about the existence of the Holocaust in August 1942, only passing the information along after a 3-month investigation. The State Dept also delayed issuing funds to the World Jewish Congress. Roosevelt never issued an appeal to the German people regarding the treatment of its Jewish citizens, despite his promise to do so, even after knowledge of the Holocaust was in the press. Magdalene laundries here in Ireland, they existed across the UK too, and I don't know about the rest of the world. They are infamous in the countries they existed. Anyway, these would have been religious institutions where pregnant unmarried women among other female sinners would go, and forcefully spend a significant chunk of their life. The pregnant woman would obviously go into labor in these institutions, and without knowing what would happen, the nuns would take their babies minutes after birth and either kill them, or send them out for adoption with no way of the mother finding them. There have been a good few instances where the grown-up baby tracked down their mother. This continued into the 70s or 80s, I believe, and families of the women were the ones that brought them there, because of shame and all that. Most Canadians know that foreigners might not. Residential schools. We kept the First Nations, Metit and Inuit there, and they were basically re-education camps, where they were punished for not acting like the white man, and wanting to keep their culture. Institute 3000 was a research center dedicated to developing chemical weapons, and it was used on many Syrians even today. It is not my direct government as it is mainly Arabs, if anything, but we share the land technically with them, so I am counting it. The US committed an ethnic cleansing of Mexicans during the 1930s. 1. 5 million people of Mexican descent, 2/3 of whom were born American citizens, were rounded up, and loaded onto cattle cars, shipped back to Mexico, where nearly all hadn't lived for decades, or had never lived at all. In the process of moving around that many people in harsh conditions, it is inevitable that people will die, and over 10,000 did. It's incredible to me that this isn't more widely known, or usually even referred to as what it is, the textbook definition of ethnic cleansing. I'm British. This could take a while, because they really did a number on Ireland and India, but if I had to pick one incident. In 1943, up to 4 million Bengalis starved to death when Winston Churchill diverted food to British soldiers in countries such as Greece, while a deadly famine swept through Bengal. Talking about the Bengal famine in 1943, Churchill said, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion. The famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits." too many to think of, but the one I feel really bad for is my government not recognizing a group of indigenous people. They are the last one, I think, to remain in the jungle. Due to the profitability of selling wood, deforestation, the government do not care about them. Large corporations would kick back to the government to attain logging license and clear out the jungle. Like the rainforest size decreased by over 50%. The indigenous people are nomads that move around the rainforest. Is basically their homes. Due to deforestation, some of them couldn't stay in the forest anymore, so they moved out from there. Some managed to do well in cities, while some suffer from poverty. In all honesty, I've never met any of them. I could be wrong, but I think not many of them are around cities. The government basically treats them like nothing. A Swiss activist, Bruno Mansa, came and tried to help them. He disappeared in 2000. There are tons of theories around his disappearance, from being lost in the jungle, I highly doubt this one cause he wasn't alone, and wouldn't have happened, to being assassinated. In my country there is only one reason to participate in politics: become rich. Every one of them are millionaires. Not only are they millionaires, but all their children or close family members are as well. They are either shareholders or part of the board of directors of the largest corporations in the country. If there is a World Best Parent in the World award, all the politicians in my country would win it every single year cause they are able to run a country and make their children I'm successful. Not just have middle income happy children, but multi-million to billionaire children. Edit, Word. Swedish government / police lost 14,000 out of 22,000 wanted illegal immigrants that were supposed to be extradited. Nobody knows where they went, and I think most of them are still lost even after 6 years. Literally lost a whole town of potential criminals. People knew about it back then, but it was very quickly forgotten. Operation Northwoods was planned, it not out into action. The fact that the government planned something like that in the 60s, when morals were supposed to be better and higher than we have today, is terrifying. Then there's the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. MK Ultra. MK Naomi. Operation Mockingbird. Japanese-American internment camps. 1970 Kent State shooting. NSA spying and wiretapping of Americans. COINTELPRO. M.O.V.E. Philadelphia. 2014 Bureau of Land Management land grab at Bundy Ranch. The CIA is a terrorist organization. Margaret Thatcher's government cut hospital budgets and gave mental patients the push out the front door into the care of community. Senility, dementia, nothing stopped them. If you cost money they didn't have, you were gone. Literally dumping mental patients into the streets and **HOPING** someone would take care of them. Many of them starved to death, unable to care for themselves, to find shelter or even communicate well enough. Crime rocketed along with more hate for the Tories. I don't actually know if people outside know this or not, but Brazil had a military dictatorship from 1964 to 1984. If you in any way tried to go against it, the government would watch your every move, and, if you were lucky, they would kill you in an accident. If you were not, you would be arrested and tortured. The I heard they would do is too horrible to write here. There are people today who defend this and say that it should happen again, like our president, who is a racist, sexist. That said, that cupboard was just a little cold and actually celebrated the anniversary of the dictatorship with a march with no masks. My country is a joke. In 1990 India, over 95k Hindus were made to leave their home or convert to Islam. Women and children were raped, and they were killing people who weren't circumcised. Worst part is government was just watching in silence, because taking actions against this wouldn't sweep their vote bank politics agenda. Well-known American atrocities. Canada just introduced Bills C-10 and C-38. One forces companies like Facebook to censor things the government doesn't like, the other essentially allows people to cry that they were offended by someone on the internet, and have the person be given like 70k in fines and years house arrest. Essentially, Canada is wanting to join Australia in their exciting journey into authoritarianism. The UK government murdered a man called Timothy Evans. https://n wikipedia.org/wiki/Timothy_Evans. In the 1950s, a man called Timothy Evans was found guilty of murdering his wife and daughter. He refused to confess to the crime and instead blamed it on his upstairs neighbor, a man called John Christie. The court didn't believe him and he, Evans, was executed. Later, it was discovered that Christie was a serial killer who murdered all his victims in the same way as Evans's alleged victims were murdered, and hid them in the same building as Evans's alleged victims. So whoops, turns out we killed the wrong guy. Evans was innocent and actually it was Christie. Only the government didn't want to admit that. Multiple investigations were held, and consistently found that, by a fabulous coincidence, two murderers who independently murdered victims in the exact same way happened to live in the same house. One inquiry in 1966, 16 years after his execution, found that Evans had killed his wife, but not his daughter, despite the fact that both were killed at the same time, and found in the same place. For complicated legal reasons, he had only been found guilty of the murder of his daughter, and this latest inquiry paved the way for a royal pardon. However, all this meant was that he shouldn't have been put to death, not that he was actually innocent, or that his conviction had been incorrect. Through a combination of incompetence, desire for expediency, contempt for the life of a human and a desire to avoid rocking the boat, the British government has never accepted *to this day that this man was wrongfully put to death, let alone taken any responsibility. A completely innocent man was murdered by the state, and the state has never made any attempt to overturn its ruling, in the face of overwhelming evidence. It should also be noted that the evidence which initially convicted Evans was also extremely flimsy. This is by no means the worst thing that my government has ever done, but it is something which remains extremely relevant today. Our current Home Secretary believes in capital punishment, and our current government is one of the most right-wing ones we've had for decades. Right-wing parties in this country tend to be in favor of capital punishment. I think that cases like this are extremely important to remember, because they demonstrate just how farcical the justice system can be, especially when it seeks to judge who deserves to die. Sadly, I fear that many in the country have forgotten the lessons from our history, which were paid for in innocent blood. It's not the worst thing, but the Highland clearances were pretty and not a lot of people know about it. MK Ultra. Ah, nice try FBI. I know you're onto me, and you'll never catch me. You've been visited by the ghost of a very important man. Pay your respects by liking and subscribing, and he'll grant you 3 weeks of good luck.